nothing that you want will manifest itself unless you aim for it. And you won't aim for it unless you know what it is. And you won't know what it is unless you ask yourself. And then you might say, well, why don't you ask yourself? And the answer is, well, maybe no one ever explained to you that you needed to, which is a crucial issue. And then maybe you don't also trust yourself. Because you might think, well, if I let myself know what I wanted, given my bloody track record, I would do everything I could to screw it up. So I'll just keep myself opaque to myself so that I don't fail at something that's truly important. And then I can always regale with myself with the idea that, well, I didn't succeed, but I didn't really try. Had I really tried, I might have succeeded. Whereas if you let yourself know what you want and then you try, you also set the preconditions for failure. So it's risky.
That's right.
But the alternative is, well, you don't know what you want. So it is a meditative practice. Like, okay, if I could have what I wanted, imagine the world was constituted so that the entire planet wouldn't explode in an apocalypse if I got what I needed and wanted. Yeah, right. It's like, what would that be? What kind of
Okay, so is this a cognitive, well, I don't want to use jargon. Is this a thought exercise or is this a feeling exercise? Because here's what I'm seeing across the country. I thought it would feel different when I finally got that associate vice president job.
Yeah, right.
I thought I would feel a certain way when I got a car. I thought if I could just get her to date me, I would feel a certain way. And people are realizing in rapid fashion, I thought if my politician won, I would suddenly feel a certain way. Here's a great, I testified in a court case against somebody years ago. A former student of mine got into did some really terrible things. And he got a long jail sentence. And the next morning I woke up and I read what the judge had written and in the sentencing, and the judge used some of my words, and I remember feeling sick to my stomach, and I called a mentor of mine, a psychology friend, professor of mine, and asked her, I said, man, I feel gross. And she said, John, nobody wins here. And I had this perception that I was going to feel a certain way when justice was done and the right thing happened. And I realized, man, I'd thought this through cognitively, but I had not managed. How are you going to actually feel? Because nobody wins. Somebody's life is ruined over here. Somebody's life is still ruined over here. I think we have to, I don't know. You're infinitely, you've got infinitely more wisdom than I do on this, but I find that the cognitive exercise is helpful, but it really is important to sit down and say, okay, how are you going to feel 5 days after you've bought this car that you think you have to have?
Well,
right?
Okay, so the first thing is that the probability that you'll be happy because you've accomplished something in any permanent sense is virtually zero. And the reason
thank you for saying that.
Well, the reason for that isn't what positive emotion is for. Positive emotion is to indicate that you're making progress towards a valued goal.
Yes.
Now that's
the driver, right? Not the finish line.
Exactly. Well, and that's actually pharmacologically separate, right? Because a satiation reward, which would be the accomplishment of something, calms you and stops that program from running. So, for example, once you've become vice president, if that was your goal, then the whole pursuing vice president program comes to a halt. Now, the problem with that is it leaves you without a goal, and it also leaves empty space, which you immediately have to fill. And so often people feel disquiet because now they don't know what to do, and they miss that rush because they're no longer pursuing something. And so it's very important to know that positive emotion is experienced in relationship to a valued goal. And then the question becomes, well, what's the most valuable goal to pursue? And that's really a metaphysical and a theological question. In terms of the mechanics of feeling, so imagine that you're negotiating the structure of a date with your wife and you're developing a shared vision. And so you say, well, on Wednesday nights, once a week, we're going to go for dinner, and maybe you specify the restaurant, and you're going to make the arrangements, and I'm going to get dressed up, and then we're going to go see a movie, and you're going to pick the movie, and then we're going to have a romantic interlude afterwards, and we'll run that and see how it goes. And then what you want to do is you want to picture that, and you want to watch how your body reacts on the emotional level. And that's a bit of honesty, it's right. And you can see, well, if we went to this restaurant, well, I don't really like that restaurant. I think it's kind of expensive. I had a bad time with the waiters. I don't think I'd be happy there. Then you say those things to your partner. You say, well, I'm thinking this through. I'm imagining it. And here's the objections that are coming up. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe I've got this wrong, but I'd like to hear your input because, we want to get this right. Should we reevaluate my feelings about the restaurant, or should we think about a different restaurant? And that should be a question, because you don't know. Maybe you're just stupid about the restaurant, or you're cheap, or you're afraid to go there because you don't have the right clothes. I mean, you don't know, right? But if you want to get your feelings in line, you develop the vision, and then you apprehend the vision with your feelings. It's kind of what you do when you go to a movie and you fall into the fantasy of the character. You embody all the emotions and you evaluate it that way. And so, and the other problem with that more goal-directed approach that you described is, I think people should plan and they should develop a vision. You have to develop the vision and then be somewhat detached from it because it needs to be updated, right, and modified. And
hold it loosely, yeah.
Yeah, you hold it loosely. Yeah, that's right. Because you're fallible and maybe you can come up with a better plan. Not every minute, because you'll drive yourself mad that way, but now and then.
Or I was obsessed as a young higher education professional with becoming a college president until I sat down at the senior leadership table and I realized I don't want that life. I don't want that life. I don't want 24/7, 365 and the politics. I don't want it, asking for money. I don't want that life. And I didn't have a backup plan. I didn't know what to do. I was like you nailed it. I was completely rudderless because I'd made the finish line the goal. Going all the way back full circle to how you open the conversation, I think that becomes really important to lay out an identity and reverse engineer. Who do I want to be? Who do I want to become? And the goals end up, it's like the old days when you went to grad school. A PhD was simply a high five on a journey of continued learning. I'm gonna continue going down this rabbit hole, and now it's become a destination. And people walk out and announce themselves as educated because I've crossed this finish line. Just because you get across you run a marathon or walk a marathon doesn't mean you're fit, right? Doesn't mean you're healthy.
Well, we talked about the necessity of goals. And so there's higher order goals. And you need the higher order goals because they integrate you. And a goal of becoming a college president is a higher order goal than no goal at all and just sitting in your bed and eating Cheetos, right? So it's right. A better plan than no plan at all. But this is where things become profound and serious. And I would say even in a religious sense, because what's religious is about what's profound and serious in some sense by definition. So you might say, well, who should I be? And you might think, well, I should be the college president. I should have this car. I should have this house. Those are all very particularized versions of yourself. And the problem with them is that they're concrete and final actualities and not processes. And so here's a good vision. That's a high order vision. And I think it's the vision that our whole culture is founded on. I should be the person who genuinely confronts the problems and challenges that confront me in my life. So that's an attitude of active and voluntary engagement, right? I'm going to do
that's an identity, yeah.
Yeah, and it's an identity of process as well. It's like I'm going to be someone who doesn't shy away from the challenges of life. Okay, and then
I'm a guy who confronts it. Yes.
Right. And so that's St. George and the Dragon, and that's a precondition for therapeutic transformation, because in order for you to improve, you have to identify the problem, the dragon, and you have to be willing to face it voluntarily. And so you say to yourself, I'm going to do what I can to develop the courage to confront the problems in my life voluntarily. That's who I want to be. And then another element of that is, I can't do that without telling the truth. I have to be willing to see what's in front of me. And I have to be willing to admit to myself what I think and feel, and I have to be willing to communicate that. And so you could say, well, that makes your goal something like, to think about it archetypally, you talked about Jungian approaches earlier, is that makes you into a truth-telling hero. And then maybe underneath that, it's like, well, could I become college president? Could I be successful in my business? Could I be successful in my marriage? It's like, that's all well and good. And those are more concretized goals. But the highest order goal has to be something like an approach rather than a final state.